Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, aka the War Hamster. Joining me as usual, my regular co-host, Mr. Constitution himself, my constitutional mentor, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Thanks for having me, as always.
And today we are going to continue our little walk through James Madison's notes from the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. When last we left you, Alexander Hamilton had dominated the floor for an entire day and gave his, let's just say, completely misguided opinions on what this new country should be. It should be one national government. There should be no state districts. All they should be is incorporated and little districts that carry out the orders that come down from the national government.
And we saw his use of big, confusing words to make it sound like it's official and a good thing.
Yes, he is very loquacious.
Yes.
To say the least. Hey, I can do a fancy word every once in a while. So, with no further ado, let's jump in. And just setting the table for people who are just now joining and haven't gone back and watched the previous episodes. This is like the 16th version, I believe. An episode of what are going to be.
Going through this, yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to take a while, but it's worth it because if you want to argue or discuss the original intent of the founding fathers, the people who wrote the Constitution, this is the best source. And we're going through it line by line and talking about what they proposed, what was counter-proposed, what was said in the debates, and how they got to their final conclusions. And we're nowhere near those final conclusions yet. So,
yeah, and I will say this, as a constitutionalist, it wasn't until I was tasked with, matter of fact, my own mentor, and he tasked me with studying Madison's notes, and then he and I went through them together, and that's when I really came into really being the constitutionalist, originalist that I am. I had studied the ratification conventions; they're important. I had studied Federalist Papers. For the most part, they're important. The letters between the founders, all of that. But until I went through Madison's notes, I really wasn't truly knowledgeable as I am today. So for you, the listener, this is good because we're doing the work for you. You just get to watch the video. But this is a key component. The Madison's notes is a key component when it comes to knowing, understanding the original intent of the Constitution. And so I'm glad you're on this journey with us.
what do you think the odds are that Ketanji Brown Jackson's ever been through Madison's notes?
I'm not even sure she was able to pass biology class, but that's beside the point.
Well, she probably stopped reading his bio when she read his bio and he said he was a slave owner. Nothing he said could possibly be worthwhile.
Exactly.
All right, let's jump in. So we are on Tuesday, June 19th, and we may be able to get through this entire day today, but we'll see how it goes. There's a number of things said at the beginning here that are going to warrant some deeper discussion.
Okay.
So jumping in. Tuesday, June 19th, Committee of the Whole. On the propositions of Mr. Patterson, this is the New Jersey proposal that was given the week before. And they're debating, what's good and what's bad about that. The New Jersey proposal represented a small state point of view, which wanted to continue with a one body of Congress with equal representation, just like the Articles of Confederation. There's some good points of the New Jersey proposal. Some of them are improvements on the Virginia plan, but not all of it's good. And that's what's going to be discussed today.
And understand, folks, when the Constitutional Convention had convened, they didn't just have a blank slate, a blank piece of paper. James Madison had written the Virginia plan, and then Randolph from Virginia, his colleague, presented it, and this was the foundation or the template that they were going through to decide what to keep, what to get rid of, with the mindset of we're trying to fix the Articles of Confederation. And of course, being from Virginia, the most populous state in the Union, and having Madison at the time been a nationalist-minded kind of guy. In other words, national government, big central government control, and the big states having the most control. The smaller states, as we're seeing here, weren't exactly hip with it. And this is where the New Jersey plan comes in. So let's get going.
All right, to get started, a substitute was offered yesterday by Mr. Dickinson. It was rejected by a vote. So we're not going to read what Dickinson's thought.
Mhm.
Mr. Patterson's plan, New Jersey plan, was again at large before the committee. And we start with James Madison, the father of the Constitution himself. And we are going to go through an awful lot of Madison. So,
hey, after all that Hamilton, it just makes sense we get the other side here a little bit.
not
Madison,
quite
and understand something about Madison, folks. He went in, I said a moment ago, as a nationalist. During the convention, you watch him slowly changing, slowly metamorphosing, in a sense, into this limited government guy. And understand, too, one of his best friends is Thomas Jefferson, who's not there, but they are writing each other. And we're getting close to the time where Jefferson's letters, responses to Madison's letters, start coming in. So let's see if we see any changes in Madison's attitude. Go ahead.
Well, I want to jump into. We're not going to do Madison's life story, but there's some parts in his Wikipedia bio, and I'm really glad you just said what you just said, because going through the Wikipedia bio, we're going to see something fascinating about Madison. And I'm just going to highlight a few things. Obviously, he's had a very long, illustrious life, and we're just going to do a few minutes. So,
yeah, well, you could do a 2-hour show on the guy.
Yeah. He's fascinating. He was a big part of a lot of important things.
And he's I hate to say it this way, but one of the big brains of the time.
So he's born in 1751, which made him 36 years old at the time of the Philadelphia Convention. So
think about that, folks. He's a youngster.
He's a founding father, to be the fourth president of the United States, father of the Constitution, helped write the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Born into a prominent slave-owning family in Virginia, 1774, he strongly opposes taxation. So he joins with the Patriots. He becomes a member of the Virginia House of Delegates and served that during the Revolutionary War. He did not fight. He was one in Congress the whole time. Talk about Madison's Virginia plan being the basis for the convention's deliberations. Talk about how he would later join Alexander Hamilton and John Jay in the Federalist Papers, pushing to ratify the Constitution.
And I have to say, his Federalist Papers are the better written, but that's just me.
Close advisor to Washington. Here's interesting. He opposed the economic program and the accompanying centralization of power favored by Secretary of the Treasury Hamilton. So alongside Jefferson, he organized the Democratic Republican Party.
Now understand something real quick. Historians all say Democratic Republican Party. At the very beginning, it was only called the Republican Party. It didn't become the Democratic Republican Party until Andrew Jackson was on the scene, and a split within the party occurred where John Quincy Adams pretty much was on the Republican side and Andrew Jackson was on the Democratic side, and that's when they started calling it Democratic Republican Party. I'm a firm believer one of the reasons why historians have always just called it the Democratic Republican Party was to avoid any confusion with the existing Republican Party, which wasn't founded until 1854.
And by the way, this is the Democratic Republican. It was not the Democrat Party. That's the Democrat Party is a different animal. But yes.
Well, and that emerged once again thanks to Andrew Jackson. And this party did become that, but that the Democratic Party has nothing in common with what originally was Jefferson's Republican Party.
Okay, Madison served as Jefferson's Secretary of State for the entire term until 1809, during which time he helped convince Jefferson to submit the Louisiana Purchase Treaty for approval by the Senate. Just a quick side note.
Originally, Jefferson wrote an amendment to the Constitution for it, and Madison says, well, you don't have to do that. Here's my idea. Treaty.
Okay. This next paragraph is interesting. Now, we'll stop with that. Madison's elected president in 1808, motivated by a desire to acquire land held by Britain, Spain, and Native Americans, and other diplomatic protests with a trade embargo failed to end British seizures of American imports, Madison led the United States into the War of 1812. Big reason for the War of 1812, if you believe all wars are banker wars, is Congress had decided not to renew the charter for the first Bank of the United States. It expired in 1811. Famous quote from one of the Rothschilds is that if you do not renew, the charter for the bank, a war will ensue.
Nathan Rothschild, if I remember properly.
I believe that's correct. There's just so many of them. Madison was reelected in 1812, which is held during wartime.
Mm-hmm.
Tell that to Zelensky. The war convinced Madison of the necessity of a stronger federal government. You remember what Doug said about Madison started as a nationalist and then became more of a federalist? Well, the war kind of changed his mind. Although the war ended inconclusively in 1815, many Americans viewed it as a successful Second War of Independence against Britain, which bolstered Madison's popularity. He then presided over the creation of the Second Bank of the United States and the enactment of the Protective Tariff of 1816.
Now, stop there for a second.
Yeah.
This is worded in a way that it really doesn't give the whole story. He didn't really believe in the necessity of a stronger federal government. He understood that the government needed to be stronger on an international front. Secondly, when it came to Second Bank of the United States, he was against it, but he was convinced to support it because of all of the debt from the war, and he had been convinced by Hamiltonian-minded people, Hamilton's gone at this point, that the only way to keep the country on solid economic or financial ground was to reenact that Second Bank of the United States.
Yeah, I think the point I was making is if you read this Wikipedia, it seems like he did a complete reversal of his previous positions. He's supporting everything that he once opposed. So
Right.
that's why I want to.
Not necessarily so.
You interject.
In fact, in 1817, he vetoed a bill for the bonus bill. Yeah, for the federal government to pay for roads and canalways, boatways they called them, and what's funny about that particular bill, originally it was his idea. Hey, we could pay for. Then he got to thinking about it. So wait a second, this is not constitutional. He wound up vetoing the bill. That's a very small government, limited government minded. Following the Constitution to its textual language. I wanted
to read that verbatim the way Wikipedia had it because
Right.
I knew what your rebuttal would be, and it just points out the dangers of using Wikipedia because some of the editors will try to change history a little bit without the context. And Doug just nailed exactly what I knew he was going to nail. So well done. So did the question at the table, did Madison flip-flop a little bit more? Not so much. But we did get the Second Bank of the United States, unfortunately, and Doug's exactly right on what the cause for that was, the war debt.
So you say my constitutional originalism is very predictable.
Well, yeah, since I've read most of what you have, I've drawn most of the same conclusions. It's pretty easy to, and I've listened to you speak about it, just about everything. All right, let's jump back in. Okay, oops, that's not what I want.
Yeah, and might I say, while I absolutely adore James Madison, he's one of my favorite founding fathers. As much as I love Madison, Jefferson ranks a little bit higher for me.
Yeah, same. I've always been a Jefferson guy. Okay. Madison, much stress had been laid by some gentlemen on the want of power in the convention to propose any other than a federal plan. They talked about whether they can even have the authority to talk about what they're talking about. To what had been answered by others, he would only add that neither the characteristics attached to a federal plan would support this objection. One characteristic was that the federal government, the power was exercised not on the people individually, but on the people collectively, on the states. It's an important point here. It's the difference between we the people and we the states. Mm-hmm. And as Doug's been known to say, the bodies that actually ratified the Constitution were the states. And the people are represented by their legislature. The legislature represents the states. So that's the hybrid difference that he really, the nuances between a democracy and using democratic principles is really what he's talking about here.
Right. And remember, this republic is very unique also in what it becomes, and he's recognizing that.
It says, yet in some instances, as in piracies, captures, and the existing confederacy, and in many instances, the amendments to it proposed by Mr. Patterson, must operate immediately on individuals. The other characteristic was that a federal government derived its appointments not immediately from the people, but from the states from which they respectively composed. That is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
That is a Federalist argument. Here, too, were the facts on the other side. In two of the states, Connecticut and Rhode Island,
Mm-hmm.
the delegates to Congress were chosen, not by the legislatures, but by the people at large. And the plan of Mr. Patterson intended no change in this particular.
Now, what he's saying is most of the delegates, the legislature, voice of the people, chose the delegates. So the delegates were indirectly chosen by the people. But in Rhode Island and Connecticut, this was done by convention. What would happen is the different districts or regions would get together and vote on who their delegate would be. Their delegate representing that group of people then would go to this convention. Delegates then gathered in convention. Now, in the case of Rhode Island, they actually had been on their way, and then at the last second turned around and went back. So Rhode Island is not represented in this particular convention. But he's talking about the difference between voted in by legislature and convention. And the rules of convention was well known at the time, and would also be applied to the ratification conventions, and would be expected to be applied to an Article 5 convention if ever one would happen. We haven't.
Your delegates owe their allegiance to the people who sent them there, and to the body that sent them there. So if they owe it to the people as a whole, that's one version, and the other, if it's sent by legislature, that's who you have your allegiance to, or you're supposed to represent.
Well, then that's how you're going to operate. Who do you want to please?
Yeah,
you know, and that's the reason why the Senate and the House being different originally is a big deal, because who are you trying to please? Trying to please, what the state legislature wants or what the people want, and it could be good on either side depending on what the issue is.
Yeah, so we settled on both until we decided to get rid of that in 1913.
Yeah.
It had been alleged by Mr. Patterson that the Confederation, having only been formed by unanimous consent, could be dissolved by unanimous consent only. We're going to get into some really important points here, okay?
Yeah, and understand, we're now going to start getting into historical precedent when it comes to contracts, compacts. Go ahead.
Yeah, and keep in the back of your mind whether the question we've been talking about for a long time is, was secession considered legal? And he's going to get into that. How do you break free of a contract? Does the doctrine result from the nature of compacts? Does it arise from any particular stipulation in the Articles of Confederation? Well, Doug, don't the Articles of Confederation actually say it's a perpetual union?
In the title.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is they deliberately left that out of the Constitution of the United States. They did not want that confusion.
Right.
And say Hotel California, if you could check in and never leave, this thing never gets ratified.
Right.
Period.
Or check out and never leave. Yeah.
If we consider the federal union as analogous to the fundamental compact by which individuals compose one society, and which must, in its theoretic origin at least, have been the unanimous act of the component members, it cannot be said that no dissolution of the compact can be effected without unanimous consent. If the union is from the people, you cannot say that an individual can't say, I'm out of here. A breach of the fundamental principles, here it is, of the compact by a part of the society would certainly absolve the other part from their obligations to it.
In other words, if you were in a contract with a group of people and you felt that they had breached the contract, that makes the contract void from your point of view, and then you can leave the contract. And that's actually contract law in today's society.
Yeah, that's why every contract you sign has breach of contract provisions.
Mm-hmm.
If the breach of any article by any of the parties does not set the others at liberty, it is because the contrary is implied in the compact itself, and particularly by the law of it, which gives an indefinite, I think he means indefinite here, authority to the majority to bind the whole in all cases. Can the majority rule over the minority no matter what. That's tyranny. This latter circumstance shows that we are not to consider the federal union as analogous to the social compact of individuals. For if it were so, a majority would have a right to bind the rest and even to form a new constitution for the whole, which the gentleman from New Jersey would be among the last to admit.
Now remember, the idea is still we're trying to fix the Articles of Confederation. He just let the cat out of the bag again, because it's been mentioned here and there before. We're not fixing the Articles. We're writing the Constitution.
Yeah, and he's making another point that if we are going to say that it has to be unanimous, or that a majority can tell the minority what to do, then that's not what we have under the Articles, and therefore we have the ability to act on our own. But here's where it gets good. If we consider that the federal union is analogous to not to the social compacts among individual men, but to the conventions among individual states, very important there. What is the doctrine resulting from these conventions? Clearly, according to the expositors of the Law of Nations, Vattel, that a breach of any one article by any one party leaves all the other parties at liberty to consider the whole convention as dissolved.
Okay, now, real quick. So, Law of Nations, was that a nod to Vattel's books? Perhaps, because there's 3 of them on the floor. 1 in French and 2 of them in English, but also the term Law of Nations is also a way of saying international law. Now, while the United States was in no way dependent or held to international law, international agreements on what is the law was important when it came to the modern nations of the time, which are basically European countries. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the philosophical underpinning is really part of the whole foundation of the Founding Fathers' ideal of political philosophy. Mm-hmm. It's about natural rights. It's really what it comes down to.
Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is from the at least Northern Europe, but it's this idea of spreading. The idea of natural rights was an understood concept. And with Christianity expanding and adopting a lot of the Saxon ideas, such as natural rights, and natural rights also, while not specifically mentioned, implied in Christian writings and in the Bible. Once again, these were ideas that were universally accepted.
And one of the core of those natural rights was the right of self-determination, self-government. Mm-hmm. And if you say that secession is illegal, then you've taken away people's right of self-determination.
And remember, they're in a world of empires. The monarchies are watching this. They know the concept exists, but they don't want their people to get the idea. So they're hoping America fails, because if America succeeds with this idea, well, then the rest of the peoples of Europe might want the same. So this is so the creation of this government is a pivotal moment also in world history.
Continuing, unless they choose rather to compel the delinquent party to repair the breach. Mm-hmm. In American history, that's what the nullification of the tariff of abominations by South Carolina and other southern states was. They were compelling the delinquent party, which were the New England states, from, you're giving us an unfair tariff, we're not going to do it. So they'd always had to push back and peel back the tariff. That was the case until 1860. In some treaties, indeed, it is expressly stipulated that a violation of particular articles shall not have this consequence, and even that particular articles shall remain in force during the war, which in general is understood to dissolve all subsisting treaties.
What it's saying is these ideas or shouldn't be, these ideas of freedom shouldn't be just dissolved because of war or any other instance, emergencies. He's kind of echoing something that I like to say. There's no asterisk in the Constitution. Just because there's an emergency doesn't mean that it stops being, valid.
Yeah, and that's something I've been saying on shows for at least several years, ever since COVID. You got to be very careful about these quote unquote emergency powers that you give to your state governors, because they will invent an emergencies to usurp their constitutional power. We've seen it time and time again. States, you need to get rid of your emergency powers in your constitutions. It's imperative that that happens. But are there any exceptions of this sort to the Articles of Confederation? So far from it that there is not even an express stipulation that force shall be used to compel an offending member of the Union to discharge its duty. There is no federal government under the Articles of Confederation, therefore they cannot force states to do what they've agreed upon. Which one of the main reasons we're meeting in Philadelphia. He observed that the violations of the federal articles had been numerous and notorious.
In other words, this contract has been breached so much.
And it lacks an enforcement arm.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Among the most notorious was an act of New Jersey herself, by which she expressly refused to comply with a constitutional requisition of Congress and yielded no further to the expostulations of their deputies than barely to rescind her vote of refusal without passing any positive act of compliance. I think that sentence speaks for itself. He did not wish to draw any rigid inferences from these observations. He thought it proper, however, that the true nature of existing confederacy should be investigated, and he was not anxious to strengthen the foundations on which it now stands. I'm wondering how they use the term anxious, because that sentence makes it seem like he doesn't want to expand the powers, and we both know that he did. It does. So that sentence confused me. You have any thoughts on that?
No, what he's saying is he doesn't want to strengthen the foundations of the existing confederacy because the confederacy is flawed, is I think what he's saying.
Okay, so that's basically saying, well, we need to go to more of a nationalistic form of government.
Well, as the confederacy, you got to remember what a difference between a confederacy, a federal government, and national government. National government, the central government controls everything. In a confederacy, the member states hold on pretty much to all their powers, and the government, the governing body that is a part of that union, has very little power. Sort of, of course, over time, that central system tends to gain power in confederacies. Great example is the European Union, where you see the central authority slowly gaining power over time. But originally, the member states countries held all the power, and the central authority had very little. Then you have a federal government in which there is a strong central government, but it's very limited on what its powers are. In other words, it's strong on the powers it has, but it doesn't have all power.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and the EU is a great example because all this power out of Brussels is basically trying to, right now, not Poland, but Hungary is very strongly against EU, use of power, and the EU is trying to punish Hungary, Orban, and it's a slippery slope. You had this confederation, which was the EU, supposedly, and just kept grabbing more and more power until it's filled with a bunch of globalist technocrats and trying to take away the sovereignty of the individual members. And it'll always happen. That's a slippery slope, and that's why the Constitution had shackles and guardrails on it. Right. And the government kept trying to break through over and over, and of course they did.
And that is human nature. History of human society, human civilization shows this over and over again. Because as I like to tell people, to hold a political office, no matter what type of government it is to hold a position of power. So what kind of people is it going to attract?
Yeah. Those
who want power.
And when you get money involved, in the politics, you are going to find
the collusion, the collusion, like with corporations and government, while Warhamster and I have had a lot of discussions regarding corporate influence on government, and it's like I tell people, I have no problem with big corporations. I have no problem with corporations doing wonderful and it leading to American prosperity. Where I have my problem is when those powerful corporations and those powerful men that run those corporations start colluding with government, and government starts colluding with corporations, and suddenly now you got not a government of the people, but or of the states, but a government of the power and the wealth and the what am I looking for?
The moneyed interests, and and what
you wind up, and they wind up with lobbyists, and it gets ugly from there. And
it's crony capitalism. You just described the mercantilist system that we fought a bloody Revolutionary War to get away from. It's the same system Alexander Hamilton tried to propose. It's the same system Lincoln and his radical Republicans imposed on the country, and it's the same system we're living under today, with their fake, 1.5 national political parties that rule everything, as opposed to having local representation. That's the gift of the Lincolnians, people.
Did I ignite a spark there? Okay, go ahead.
I got one of my social media websites, patriots.win. There's a gentleman, he's done his homework, but he's read the wrong history, and he thinks that secession was never legal. So I wanted to make sure we emphasize this so I can send him the videos. Definitely, you know who you are if you watch the video. And it's it's my pet peeve too.
Yeah, it's secession, and when it comes to, and let me say this real quick, then let me give you the 30 seconds that you may need here. When it comes to the Constitution, the language of the Constitution, this 10th Amendment pretty much says it all about secession. Is secession given to the federal government as an authority? No. Is it prohibited to the states? No. Therefore, it is a state authority, according to the 10th Amendment. Simple as that.
Yeah, I'll take it one step further, since it's one of my favorite topics. Did the founding fathers and the next generations believe secession was legal? Absolutely, they did. The first talk of secession was 1894, when a bunch of New England states wanted to leave because it wasn't a New England central enough union. They did not do that. They then met in the Hartford Convention of 1814, similar New England states, because the tariffs brought on by the War of 1812 were impoverishing a economy that was relying on international trade. They talked about seceding and joining Canada. They took a vote in Hartford. They ended up not doing it. Nullification was discussed. Secession was discussed throughout. And lastly, if you look at the election of 1860, there were 4 major political parties. If any of the 3 had passed, secession wouldn't have happened. But the radical Republicans, if you look at their platform, they were adamant about imposing federally funded internal improvements, crony capitalism, protective tariffs, crony capitalism. If the Republicans won, everyone knew several southern states would secede. And anybody who uses the excuse that the war started because the South fired on Fort Sumter, and that which gave Lincoln his excuse. No, if secession was illegal, he wouldn't have needed the excuse. He would have invaded the second they, drafted their articles of the Confederate Constitution. He would not have needed the excuse of Fort Sumter if secession was illegal. All right, moving on.
And the use of internal improvements, federal money being used for internal improvements, had been a battle ever since that 1817 veto by Madison. And it was a battle that went back and forth, and those who were the originalists began losing ground as the Whigs began. You had 5 presidencies in which 4 of them were the Whigs. And John Tyler was actually thrown out of the party because he kept vetoing bills calling for federal funding of internal improvements.
Yeah, and when they say federally funded internal improvements, these are government contracts. They're given out to their best friends, usually the people that push the politicians in power in the first place. This is how and the time period of 1860, the railroads being built, the expansion west, steel plants are being built, iron ore, everything like that. This was big bucks. It was huge amounts of money, and they could not have done the Intercontinental Railroad without the tax dollars. So when the tax base of the South seceded, Lincoln invaded. Continuing. That is my hot button issue, isn't it?
Like I said, did I light a spark there? Yeah.
All right, we're going to stick to the topic now a little bit.
All right, go ahead.
Proceeding to the consideration of Mr. Patterson's plan, he stated the object of a proper plan to be twofold. 1, to preserve the Union, and 2, to provide a government that will remedy the evils felt by the states, both in their united and individual capacities. Examine Mr. Patterson's plan and say whether it promises satisfaction in these respects.
And this is a very important thing that he just said. Preserve the Union. We want to keep everybody together. But the states have concerns about both the government that's going to run the Union and the fact that other states in their individual capacities could be detrimental to the Union. And so they understand, and Madison's laying it out there, that this needs to be resolved. How do we resolve this? How do we quell the fears, but at the same time enable? In other words, we quell the fears of sovereignty of the states, but we allow the sovereignty of states. We quell the fears of a bigger government, but at the same time, we enable the creation of one. How do you find that balance? This is what he's laying out there, and it's a very key thing to say. And I believe this was a very important part of the beginning of them realizing that they needed to find some type of balance that was like nothing ever tried before.
Yep, and then lays it out succinctly. Okay, I was going to go into a bunch of points here. Talking about the New Jersey plan, will it prevent those violations of the law of nations and treaties which, if not prevented, must involve us in the calamities of foreign wars? Love
now,
that sentence.
Let's stop there for a second. One of the main ones they're talking about is Britain interfering with their trade routes. Okay, they're also talking about Islam interfering with their trade routes. This is all coming down to their ability to trade with other countries. That, and their ships, their merchant ships being seized upon. This is a large part of what this is. Now, there's also territorial arguments locally. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But just keep in mind that the Atlantic Ocean, which is their artery to all of their trade partners, is a big part of this.
Yeah, and what he's saying is the New Jersey plan does not give us enough teeth, doesn't have a central government to defend and protect those trade routes.
And neither does the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah. The tendency of the states to these violations, meaning of the states pissed off other people, has been manifested in sundry instances. The files of Congress contain complaints already from almost every nation with which treaties have been formed, meaning the states individually have violated international treaties. Hitherto indulgence has been shown to us, so they haven't done anything to us yet. This cannot be the permanent disposition of foreign nations. Sooner or later, they are going to get ticked off. A rupture with other powers is among the greatest of national calamities.
Because if there's no trade, your economy's in trouble.
And he's also
you can
worried
manufacture, you can sell internally, but where your real wealth comes is you selling your manufactured products abroad.
Yeah, and what he says right here is the existing Confederacy does not sufficiently provide against this evil. The proposed amendment to it does not supply the omission that leaves the will of the states as uncontrolled as ever. So the sovereignty of the states is dangerous because they do on their own, but yet you want them to keep a certain amount of sovereignty. How do you solve this? You give one central government the very enumerated power to handle all international affairs.
Mm-hmm. Give the external issues to the central power. Give the internal issues to the states.
Bingo.
Ultimately, that's what they come to.
Which Gavin Newsom understood.
Federalist paper number 45 lays it out nicely, by the way.
Was that Madison wrote that one?
Yeah, Madison wrote that one. Well, of course. If it lays it out nicely, it was probably Madison.
Hey, I got to admit, Hamilton made some good arguments in there. He didn't believe what he was writing, but he made good arguments.
Oh, well, the Federalist Paper 85 is a fantastic defense of Article 5 Convention. I use that often. But, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Especially when he doesn't believe what he's saying and he's doing it just to get it passed so he can then do a 180. But
because he knows New York is full of a bunch of anti-federalists. Anyway,
right.
Go ahead.
2, will the New Jersey plan, will it prevent encroachments on the federal authority? A tendency to such encroachments has been sufficiently exemplified among ourselves as well in every other confederated republic, ancient and modern.
Okay, now notice what he's saying here. Federal authority. Not saying national authority where they control everything, but the authorities given to the federal, the external issues.
By federal articles, transactions with the Indians appertain to Congress. Yet in several instances, the states have entered into treaties and wars with them. In like manner, no 2 or more states can form among themselves any treaties without the consent of Congress. Yet Virginia and Maryland, in one instance, Pennsylvania and New Jersey in another, have entered into compacts without previous application or subsequent apology.
Now, stop right there. He's saying we've got these issues that we laid out in the Articles of Confederation, and we say, hey, you can't do this. They do it anyway because the government has no teeth. It's looked upon as guidance or just a body, but it doesn't have any authority when it comes to the states. We want state sovereignty, but at the same time, we don't want states just doing whatever they want whenever they want when it comes to international affairs or any agreements with other countries. And we've got to take care of this, or we're not going to last.
Yeah, he's also saying, Virginia can't make, one trade deal with Maryland and another one with, say, Georgia.
Right.
It's got to be equal. If we're all part of a union, we all need to trade together equally.
Right. Well, and that's where you get the free commerce without treaties and deals, because you're all part of the same country. He's saying that the states are acting too much like their own countries and not like members of a union. We want them to be sovereign. We want them to have their independence on certain issues, but they are a part of the same country. We are a union now. Let's act like it.
Because next one is very important. No state, again, can of right raise troops in time of peace without the like consent. Of all cases of the League, this seems to require the most scrupulous observance. Has not Massachusetts, notwithstanding the most powerful member of the Union, already raised a body of troops? Shays' Rebellion. Is she not now augmenting them without having ever even deigned to appraise Congress of her intention?
Yeah, in the case of Massachusetts with Shays' Rebellion, it wasn't just that they raised troops. They were foreign mercenaries on top of that were hired by the corporations, the merchants out of Boston. So, and this is dangerous, according to Madison.
Those would be your Boston Brahmins, a term that people should be more familiar with if you want to know who the American aristocracy is. In fine, have we not seen the public land dealt out to, not sure what that abbreviation is, Connecticut probably, to bribe her acquiescence in the decree constitutionally awarded against her claim on the territory of Pennsylvania?
It's definitely Connecticut.
For no other possible motive can account for the policy of Congress in that measure. If we recur to the examples of other confederacies, we shall find in all of them, the same tendency of the parts to encroach on the authority of the whole. And that would be the case under the Articles of Confederation because, the central government barely exists. It has no authority.
In my Constitution classes, I would use an example often to explain how the states bickered. They bickered like siblings. My sister and I used to beat each other senseless. But yet when push came to shove, we were also there for each other. The states were sort of very similar. And Madison saying, this can't continue. We'll tear ourselves apart from within. Very
good. He then reviewed I'm not even going to try that one.
Amphictyonic, it looks like. An Archaean. Or Archaean.
Confederacies among the ancients and the Helvetic, Germanic, and Belgic among the moderns, tracing their analogy to the United States in the Constitution and extent of their federal authorities, in the tendency of the particular members to usurp on these authorities and bring confusion and ruin on the whole. You got too much decentralized power, you're going to get chaos. That's all he's saying there.
And he's saying history tells us.
He observed that the plan of Patterson, besides omitting a control over the states as a general defense of the federal prerogatives, was particularly defective in two of its provisions. One, its ratification was not to be by the people at large, but by the legislatures. It could not, therefore, render the acts of Congress in pursuance of their powers, even legally paramount to the accounts of the states, acts of the states. Okay. Got confused because he used it in a capital letter where I didn't expect him to. It gave to the federal tribunal an appellate jurisdiction only, even in criminal cases enumerated. It's an important point. We're talking about the judiciary. Mm-hmm. They could only be the appeals court. You could, and he's going to point out the flaws right here, so I'll just let him do it. The necessity of any such provision supposed a danger of undue acquittals in the state tribunals. Of what avail could an appellate tribunal be after an acquittal? Besides, in most, if not all, of the states, the executives have by their respective constitutions the right to pardoning. How could this be taken from them by a legislative ratification only? A little bit there to unpack. I don't want to go deep into that, but he really is talking about what these are more early arguments for what became Article 3.
Well, and he's saying that basically it's too easy for the states to disregard central power. We want stronger central power. We fear too big a central power, but not enough. We've got a problem, and the states are disregarding it. And we're not. This is not a true union if that's how we're going to act.
Okay. Number 3, third objection against the Patterson Plan. Will it prevent trespasses of the states on each other? We just did trespass
between the states.
Yeah. Enough has already been of this. Enough has already been seen. Mr. Ness. He instanced acts of Virginia and Maryland, which give a preference to their own citizens in cases where the citizens of other states are entitled to equality of privileges by the Articles of the Confederation. You're supposed to give other citizens of your fellow members of the Union the same rights and privileges as your own. No favoritism.
This is Article 4, Section 2 is what it becomes. What we're talking about is privileges and immunities. What if we're a union? We're not separate little countries. If we're a union, then the privileges and immunities that a citizen has in one state must be in all states. And if there's someone from another state in your state, they are also entitled to the same privileges and immunities. That's what he's saying.
Yep. And right now, the Articles of Confederation cannot guarantee that, and there have been abuses of that.
Well, once again, under the Articles of Confederation, Confederacy is the member states are their own little countries. They take care of everything, every little detail. And the central system has almost no power whatsoever. Once again, he's not arguing for an overpowering national government controls everything, but it's got to control more than it does, because right now we've got rogue states doing whatever they want, and the bickering siblings, and it's going to tear the union apart.
Here's a big one here coming. He considered the emissions of paper money and other kindred measures as also aggressions. The states at the time are issuing their own coin. You would find that one of the main things in Article 1, Section 8 is the Congress has the sole power to emit coin. The amount of deflation and counterfeiting of the Confederate dollar, the colonials during the war, and these different Confederate states, basically, yeah, this was chaotic. You couldn't trust the money issued from one state to another.
Right.
The states, and that's a terrible way to run commerce. If I have $100 in Delaware, it ought to be worth $100 in New Jersey. This states relatively to one another, being each of them either debtor or collector. The creditor states must suffer unjustly from every emission by the debtor states. Meaning, if Maryland owes Virginia money, and Maryland decides to print money, thus deflating the value, to pay off Virginia, Virginia suffers.
Weimar Republic comes to mind for some reason.
United States of America, modern day, comes to mind for some reason.
Yeah.
We have seen retaliating acts on this subject which threaten danger, not to the harmony only, but the tranquility of the Union. The plan of Mr. Patterson, not giving even a negative on the acts of the states, left them as much at liberty as ever to execute their unrighteous projects against each other.
Now, remember, coming into the convention, Madison believed that the National Congress should be able to negative any state law or state action as unconstitutional. Now, this was not readily acceptable to most of the delegates, but on the same token, they understood that they couldn't let the states then just run away with everything. So what happened was there are certain things in the Constitution laid out that the Congress can negative, but it's only specific things. And a good example is Article 1, Section 4, when if a state has a law regarding elections of the federal offices, the House of Representatives of the Senate, that Congress believes not to be right, to be tyrannical or something of that nature, then Congress can issue a law to negative that state election regulation. But that doesn't mean that the federal Congress can negative all state laws, or that the courts can negative all state laws or any state law at their whim. The courts seem to think that today, but from a constitutional standpoint, any negatives against a state law is very specifically indicated in the Constitution.
Yeah, if it's not the enumeration doctrine, it most certainly is indicated in the 10th Amendment and Ninth and 10th Amendment. So,
yeah.
All right, number 4. Will it secure the internal tranquility of the states themselves? The insurrections in Massachusetts admonished all of the states of the danger to which they were exposed. Yet the
in other words, Shays' Rebellion is the disease that could have spread.
Yeah, I don't think Shays' Rebellion ought to be taught as a much more important point in the U.S. history than it is in current textbooks, because it really shaped a lot of the things they're talking about.
Well, it's the main reason why they had the Annapolis Convention a year before, August of 1786, which then called for this convention in the first place. If it hadn't been for Shays' Rebellion, they probably would not have had that convention, which called for this convention in the first place.
Yeah. Yet the plan of Mr. Patterson contained no provisions for supplying the defect of the Confederation on this point. We're here because of Shays' Rebellion, and you're not going to fix the problem. According to the Republican theory, indeed, right and power, both being invested in the majority, are held to be synonymous. According to fact and experience, a minority may, in an appeal to force, be an overmatch for the majority. 1. If the minority happen to include all such as possess the skill and habits of military life, with such as possess the great pecuniary resources, 1/3 may conquer the remaining 2/3.
He's talking about while we understand that the smaller states don't want to be gobbled up, if we give them too much, and then you suddenly have a tyranny of the minority, is what he's saying.
1/3 of those who participate in the choice of rulers may be rendered a majority by the accession of those whose poverty disqualifies them from a suffrage, and who, for obvious reasons, may be more ready to join the standard of sedition than that of the established government. Class warfare he's talking about. Mm-hmm. Where slavery exists, the Republican theory becomes still more fallacious. Okay, number 5. Will it secure a good internal legislation administration to the particular states? Nice. This is slippery slope stuff here. In developing the evils which vitiate the political system of the U.S., it is proper to take into view those which prevail within the states individually, as well as those which affect them collectively. Since the former indirectly affect the whole, and there's a great reason to believe that the pressure of them had a full share in the motives which produced the present convention. You see why I'm saying this is slippery slope?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Under this head, he enumerated in animadverted.
I still crack up Madison. I get why he does it, but referring to himself as in third person is kind of funny to watch.
Yeah. On 1, the multiplicity of the laws passed by the several states. 2, the mutability of their laws. And 3, the injustice of them. 4, the impotence of them. Observing that Mr. Patterson's plan contained no remedy for this dreadful class of evils, and cannot therefore be received as an adequate provision of the exigencies of community. St. Patterson's plan didn't give the national body the right to curtail state laws. He's going back to federal negatives. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And once again, we got to be careful. You don't throw the baby out with bathwater, sort of thing. To avoid one evil, you don't use a different evil. They will come to that conclusion though before it's all over.
6, will it secure the Union against the influence of foreign powers over its members? He pretended not to say that any such influence had yet been tried, but it was naturally to be expected that occasions would produce it. That's why they should have had a FARA Act.
Yeah, one of the reasons why it was a shame that Rhode Island wasn't there. Rhode Island was probably the most susceptible to foreign influence.
Considering they were basically founded by smugglers, yes. As lessons which claimed particular attention, he cited the intrigues practiced among there's the Aphiomactic, I don't even know what these people were. I've never heard that term, I don't think. Confederates, first by the kings of Persia, and afterwards fatally by the Philippomatic. He's just going to go over and talk about how foreign powers have used bribe people to...
Yeah, apparently the Amphictyonic Confederates were somewhere between the Middle East and Greece. That's the way it seems.
Okay, well, anyways, this is going to be a history lesson of what basically we call intelligence operations today. So,
right.
I'm going to skip over that because we all know that history. And he's saying Patterson's plan doesn't do anything about that. 7, he begged the smaller states which were most attached to Mr. Patterson's plan to consider the situation in which it would leave them. In the first place, they would continue to bear the whole experience of maintaining their delegates to Congress. Oh, it's so expensive to send your delegates. You can't afford it. You're a poor little state. It not to be said that if they were willing to bear this burden, no others had a right to complain. As far as it let the small states to forbear keeping up a representation by which the public business was delayed, it was evidently a matter of common concern. We don't need to read this argument because it's a little bit, I don't know. You understand what he's saying? That you need to have, because you're a poor state, you need to pool your resources with the national, and that way we big states will pay for your delegates to come. That's really what he's saying. And I'm going to skip over the rest of this because it's monotonous. Number 8, he begged them to consider the situation in which they were to remain in case their pertinacious adherence to an inadmissible plan should prevent the adoption of any plan. The contemplation of such an event was painful, but it would be prudent.
He's saying that he doesn't want them to say, well, if we don't get our plan, then nothing. Well, we take nothing. That's what he's saying.
The contemplation of such an event is painful. Would it be prudent to submit to the task of examining at a distance, that the means of escaping it might be the more readily embraced? And I think he's saying that his original Virginia plan is that means. Let the union of the states be dissolved, and one of the two consequences must happen. Either the states must remain individually independent and sovereign, or two or more confederacies must be formed among them. In the first event, would the small states be more secure against the ambition and power of the larger neighbors than they would be under a general government pervading with an equal energy every part of the empire? And this is a valid concern because, what is it? Virginia is something like 600 times bigger than Delaware.
Yeah.
And
if you're not a part of the union, you're easy pickings, guys.
They're worried that if we form the union and we're part of it, we're going to get outvoted. But if you leave the union, you're just going to get swallowed up. So,
you don't exist at all.
And he's scaring. This is basically fear-mongering, and it's accurate. And having an equal interest in protecting every part against every other part. In the second, can the smaller expect that their larger neighbors would confederate with them on the principle of the present confederacy, which gives to each member an equal suffrage, or that they would exact less severe concessions from the smaller states than are proposed in the scheme of Mr. Randolph, which is the Virginia plan?
Yeah. Oh, what he's saying is, do you really believe the big states are going to relegate themselves down to being the same as you?
Yeah. Okay. This is the last paragraph we'll do today. And this is really, it's an important one because it leads towards the compromise. The great difficulty lies in the affairs of representation, which is basically pretty much the major topic over the first 2 weeks. We're still unsettled. And if this could be adjusted, all others would be surmountable until the 17th Amendment is passed. It was admitted by both the gentlemen from New Jersey, both of them, Brearley and Patterson, that it would not be just to allow Virginia, which was 16 times as large as Delaware, an equal vote only. Their language that it would not be safe for Delaware to allow Virginia 16 times as many votes. The expedient proposed by them was that all the states should be thrown into one mass and a new partition be made into 13 equal parts. All right, let's stop there.
Yeah, because states are going to allow the lines to change. Yeah, I don't think so.
We'll talk about that in a second here. But the point he's making is, we've hit this over and over again when we've done videos on the 17th Amendment or Reynolds v. Sims, which I spoke publicly on Monday night. You've always got to protect the small states from the big and the big states from the small. That's where the compromise comes in. And then he's saying, well, we can just make sure you don't have to worry about sides. We'll just break it up. And we'll redraw state lines as populations move. So he goes, would such a scheme be practicable? The dissimilarities.
Better yet, does the differences remain the same?
Yeah, he's going to say exactly.
Do that equality stay the same?
Why even have districts if you're going to do it that way? That just becomes administrative districts for one nation. That's why we're a federal republic and not a national republic.
Yeah, suddenly I'm thinking Hunger Games. All right, go ahead.
That movie gets more and more relevant every year. The dissimilarities existing in the rules of property, as well as in the manners, habits, and prejudices of the different states, amounted to a prohibition of the attempt. Hamilton had proposed this yesterday, the day before, and even Madison saying, no. Maryland's a different culture than Virginia. It's a different culture than Massachusetts. They're just saying that you cannot do that. Gerrymandering the states. Can you imagine the fighting? It had been found impossible for the power of one of the most absolute princes in Europe, King of France, direct by the wisdom of one of the most enlightened and patriotic ministers, Mr. Necker, that any age has produced to equalize in some points only the different usages and regulations of the different provinces. But admitting a general amalgamation and repartition of the states to be practicable, and the danger apprehended by the smaller states from a proportional representation to be real, would not a particular and voluntary coalition of these with their neighbors be less inconvenient to the whole community and equally effectual for their own safety? Again, he's pushing for the original Virginia plan, or some version of it, some watered down. He's saying we may compromise a bit from what was first proposed. But isn't this better off than the alternatives? And it is.
Hey, you want to be a small part of something great, or do you just want to be on your own and swallow it up? Your call.
If New Jersey or Delaware conceive that an advantage could accrue to them from equalization of the states, in which case they would necessarily form a junction with their neighbors, why might not this end be attained by leaving them at liberty by the Constitution to form such a junction whenever they pleased? Yeah, small states can team up. And why should they wish to obtrude a like arrangement on all the states when it was, to say the least, extremely difficult, would be obnoxious to many of the states, and when neither the inconveniency nor the benefit of the expedient to themselves would be lessened by confining it to themselves? The prospect of many new states to the westward was another consideration of importance. If they should come into the Union at all, they would come when they contained but few inhabitants. If they should be entitled to vote according to their proportions of inhabitants, all would be right and safe. Let them have an equal vote and a more objectionable minority than ever might give law to the whole. Pretty strong arguments he's making.
You can still see the nationalistic angle that he has, but you can also see him going, well, Maybe I can move a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying here. It's a little bit of moving.
Now remember, he hasn't started receiving the responses to his letters to Jefferson yet. So Jefferson's influences have not kicked in yet, and we're still in a debate stage of this convention where they're still trying to figure out the basics. They haven't even gotten to the point where they're actually writing clauses. They haven't even agreed on what this thing's going to look like yet.
What they've been debating is, shall we vote on Mr. Patterson's plan? And so they brought this to the floor after all the arguments on a question for postponing generally the first proposition of Mr. Patterson's plan. It was agreed to, New York and New Jersey only being a no. On the question moved by Mr. King, whether the committee should rise and Mr. Randolph's propositions be re-reported without alteration, which was in fact a question of whether Mr. Randolph should be adhered to as preferable to those of Mr. Patterson. They would vote and the ayes would take it. So now we're going to start debating. We're going to reread Mr. Randolph's proposals, and then we'll get back to debate. We're going to end there for today because these are long resolutions. There's about 19 of them. And you got Wilson, Hamilton, King, Wilson, and Hamilton talking about that. And that commentary.
And Wilson's interesting because while he is a New York colleague in a sense, he's from Pennsylvania. But when I say New York colleague, in other words, he's kind of in agreement, sort of, with Hamilton on some stuff. But at the same time, he recognizes the need for something that's federal, not national. So, Wilson's a fascinating guy because some of my favorite quotes comes from the guy. He gets what the Constitution was about. He does believe it didn't go far enough for creating a big enough government, but he's not as extreme as Hamilton. So watching him talk is kind of entertaining.
Yeah, he ended up being a pretty prominent member of the Federalist Party, so that's where he ended up.
Right. Well, but he would, in a sense, I guess you could say he was a closer to being a moderate than Hamilton would be, though, in that sense. Yeah.
And that's why I want to pause right here, not only for hear what Wilson has to say, but Hamilton's going to double down on stupidity with what he says the rest of this day.
Of course he is.
Yeah, and that's
what Hamilton does.
I don't want to rush through that because we really do want to hammer the point home.
Yeah. So, now, I don't know how many of you understand how much I loathe Alexander Hamilton. And it's funny because I have a feeling you weren't a big fan of Hamilton when you met me, but I probably convinced you that he was not necessarily so very good. But we have to, at the same time, recognize that while he was off his rocker on most stuff, a lot of what he proposes, a lot of what he says is actually influential for the good. I mean, his call for a bigger government actually is the whole reason why the Constitutional Convention exists in the first place. He didn't get what he wanted. It wasn't as big as he had hoped in the creation of the Constitution, but we did need something stronger than we had. So, so when we talk about Hamilton in this sense, we have to recognize some of that.
Yeah, I don't have Hamilton as my number one villain in American history, but he is on the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
My top villain in American history has always been Abraham Lincoln. And there's a lot of Republicans that, what are you talking about? He saved the Union. Well, yeah. You know what
I tell people he's on my list of the 5 worst presidents from a constitutional standpoint, and people are shocked.
Well, considering completely ignored it, yeah. I mean, suspending habeas corpus, all that stuff. Yeah. All right, pretty good episode. Madison had some pretty good things to say. We see a little bit of a change going on, and we see the different push and pull of the different plans, and right. They're talking it out. We got to see Madison talk in the first person as always, and we got to read some really long words, some of which I even pronounced correctly.
Yeah, now I got to do some geography lessons to figure out where all those ancient civilizations are.
And I've done that geography. I just don't recall ever seeing that. That's got to be a different term for some other story we know. And I'm going to look that up right when we get done here, and I'm going to say, oh, of course, that's what they're talking about. And Madison just decided to use a longer word. Again, because I've read a lot of ancient history, and I would remember seeing that word. But
yeah, well, sometimes even Madison could be. What was the word you used earlier? Loquacious.
okay, so let me see if I can find. You know what? I'm tempted to do that right now and look up where that is. Where do we have it?
All right, so while you're doing that, here's what I'll tell everybody. You can find me at douglasvgibbs.com. It's right there. Matter of fact, on the screen right there. douglasvgibbs.com. Go to the blog. I'm writing pretty much every day now that I'm able to again. Still got a few things to do with the site. My link bar isn't exactly the way I want it. We won't talk about that. And also, I am on the radio a lot. So KMET 1490 AM on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. Then I've got the two San Diego stations, KPRZ and KCBQ, The Answer of San Diego, on Saturday nights at 8. And then KPGF out of Reno, and that's just a part of the broader Zaki Radio network, ZakiRadio.com on Wednesdays and Thursdays, 11 a.m. Wednesdays with Warhamster, and Thursdays on my own. And then I do also perform online programming as well. Fridays and Sundays on the Patriots Soapbox Network, and Rumble at Mr-Constitution.com. Learn the Constitution shows on the Untold History channel, Ron Partain, his channel. If you go there and go, well, wait a second, it's just a bunch of videos. Look for the ones that say Learn the Constitution. Those are the shows that I am on. And so, and it's always a pleasure to be here on Warhamster's Rumble channel. Here's how you can go straight to it without just searching it. It's rumble.com/Warhamster, capitalize the W, capitalize the H, no space, no hyphen, whatever. Rumble.com/Warhamster, one word, capitalize the W, capitalize the H. You'll go straight to the page. And it's not just these shows that you probably watched right there at that channel, but also go looking for, if you miss them, those Wednesday episodes on Zaki Radio, the Re-Federalist Radio, which he also puts on his page.
Very good. And I guess we're going to finish with this. The Amphictyons are deputies from the Confederated States of ancient Greece to a Congress or council. They considered both political and religious matters. So it was not some bizarre...
Well, I was right. It was somewhere between the Middle East and Greece. It was just on the western side of what I thought was the region.
But the way he wrote it sounded like, he's comparing it to other former republics, and they were not a republic. They were actors in the republic, and that's why we got it wrong. It's like, wait a minute, I've never heard of that nation.
All right, very good.
Everybody, thanks for watching. Until the next time, cheers.